I never believed a life could break quietly, without a scream, without a final warning. Just a slow, aching collapse that you only recognize once you're already buried beneath it. For years I told myself I was fine. I told myself that sacrifice was a blessing, that giving was a duty, and that love, true love, meant enduring without question. I thought that was what a mother was supposed to do. But the truth is, somewhere along the way, I stopped being a person and became a machine. An ATM with a heartbeat. A shadow moving through a house filled with memories I tried so hard to protect. I worked for every cent I ever had. I earned it with aching bones, tired feet, and nights where sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. And yet, everything I built somehow became something they felt entitled to. I remember the night everything changed. I was sitting across from my children, Tanisha and Malik. Faces I once adored. Faces I once thought I would protect until my last breath. But as I looked at them, all I could feel was the cold sting of disappointment. Not because they were flawed, but because somewhere along the years they stopped seeing me as their mother. They saw a wallet, a safety net, a solution to every bad choice they made. And when I told them what I had done, how I had moved my money, how I had taken back the control they believed belonged to them, I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. For the first time, I spoke from the deepest part of my spirit. The part they had ignored for years. Their shock didn't hurt me. Their anger didn't scare me. What hurt was realizing they truly believed they owned my life. But that night was the beginning. Not of an ending, but of a rebirth I didn't know I was capable of. When Tanisha stood up that night, her face changed so sharply it was like watching a mask crack. The sadness she had worn so convincingly melted into pure burning rage. She spat Ellie's name like poison, accusing her of manipulating me, twisting my thoughts, turning me against my own blood. And in that moment I understood something painful but necessary. My daughter didn't know me at all. She didn't know my heart, my loneliness, or the emptiness she and her brother had carved into me over the years. Ellie wasn't my savior. She was simply the first person in a long, long time who saw me, who asked how I was without following it with a request for money, who listened when I spoke, not because she wanted something but because she cared. And that simple kindness had become a lifeline I didn't even know I needed. Malik started pacing, running his hands through his hair, whispering to himself like he was trying to wake up from a nightmare. "This can't be real," he kept saying. "Mama wouldn't do this. Mama wouldn't turn her back on us." But the truth was, I wasn't turning my back on them. They had turned theirs on me years before. I was just finally facing the direction they pushed me toward. Then came the words I had heard so many times that they had lost all meaning. "We've always loved you, Mama. We've always been there for you." I laughed then. An empty, humorless sound that didn't feel like it came from my throat, but from the broken pieces of my heart. Where were they when I spent holidays alone? When I was sick and no one knocked on my door? When the only voice I heard all day was my own echoing back at me? Love isn't a word, it's a presence. And they had abandoned me long before this night. Handing them the envelopes felt like burying a ghost version of motherhood I had clung to for too long. Watching their confusion, their disbelief, their entitlement crumble, it didn't give me joy. It simply gave me clarity. For the first time in years I understood I had to save myself because no one else ever would. Tanisha opened her envelope with shaking fingers, her breath catching as she searched for something. Money, property, a final act of generosity she could twist into proof that I still loved her the way she wanted, not the way she needed. But when she found only the key to her father's memories, her face collapsed into disbelief. "Nothing else," she whispered, as if the idea alone was an insult. "This is it." "Yes," I said softly. "That's it." Because memories were all I had left to give her. The rest, my peace, my money, my hope, those belonged to the woman I was becoming, not the mother they had taken for granted. Malik didn't even bother opening his. He stared at the envelope as if it might explode, then pushed it away like a child rejecting vegetables he never intended to try. His silence was louder than Tanisha's disbelief. It told me everything I needed to know about his heart, cold, shallow, and distant. Tanisha's tears started again, this time falling hard enough to stain the tablecloth. Whether they were real or another performance, I no longer had the energy to figure out. Malik stepped toward me, trying to place his hands on my shoulders, trying to force a connection he hadn't earned in years. "We're your family," he insisted. "We're all you have." I looked him dead in the eyes as I removed his hands from my body. "And that," I said, "is the saddest part of all." The words hung between us like smoke, thick, undeniable, inescapable. It was the first time in decades I allowed myself to say what had been buried beneath duty and sacrifice. They weren't my comfort. They weren't my joy. They weren't even my support. They were a responsibility I had carried alone long after they stopped being children. When I walked them to the door, my heart didn't tremble. My hands didn't shake. My breath stayed steady. I was finally stepping out of the cage I had built around myself. Their car pulled away, the taillights disappearing like fading memories. And behind the silence they left, I heard the faintest whisper of freedom. I stood in the empty house, the echoes of their voices still lingering in the corners. I had expected a flood of emotion, grief, guilt, regret, but instead there was only an unfamiliar calm. The kind of calm that feels like breathing after being underwater for far too long. Each step I took across the worn floorboards felt like reclaiming something I had forgotten I owned myself. I went to the dining room and looked at the envelopes, the papers, the few remaining traces of the life I had built for them, only to be used and discarded. Slowly, methodically, I began to clear. I washed the dishes that had piled up, stacked the envelopes neatly, and tucked away the remnants of old meals. With every movement, I felt the weight of 50 years of sacrifice slipping from my shoulders, falling into the drain along with the water. The Vivian I had been, the one who gave and gave until nothing remained, was leaving this house behind, and a new Vivian was emerging, one who no longer owed her heart to ungrateful hands. It was strange how liberating it felt to let go, even of the very spaces that had once been my sanctuary. Ellie had come by almost every day, her presence a steady balm. She helped me pack slowly, carefully. Not everything, just enough to step out into a life that belonged to me. Clothes, a few treasured books, a handful of photographs, my past but not their inheritance. Each box I packed, each drawer I emptied, each memory I chose to keep or release was a declaration. I existed for me, finally, not for anyone else's convenience or comfort. I even started preparing for the sale of the house. It was more than just a transaction. It was a symbolic shedding of chains. For the first time in decades, I realized that freedom wasn't about running from them. It was about finally stopping to stand for myself. The lawyer confirmed everything could be finalized in a month, and I felt a thrill of power mixed with relief. This house, which had been both a refuge and a prison, would no longer define me. I imagined the closing day, signatures, handshakes, papers exchanged, and the finality of it all thrilled me. Every corner of this house carried memories of Marcus, of my children, of a life spent giving without receiving. Yet, as I imagined those papers signed, I felt lighter, unburdened, as if the very walls were releasing me into the air. I began giving things away. Old furniture, things that had once symbolized our life together, I entrusted to neighbors who had always treated me with kindness and respect. Miss Eva Carter from the corner received the dining room table. She hugged me and whispered thank you 1,000 times, and I realized the table would be treasured in ways it never could have been with my children. Mr. George Thomas took the sofa, and the lady who sold flowers at the corner took the television. Every item leaving the house felt like a piece of my past leaving too, a cleansing of decades of accumulated obligation and disappointment. And then 3 weeks after that fateful dinner, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to see Tanisha alone, her expression heavy with importance. She had rehearsed this moment, I could tell. I let her in, curious, but not because I had forgiven her. She looked around, noticed the empty spaces where furniture had once been, and gasped. "Where's the sofa?" she asked. I told her the truth. I had given it away because it was mine to give. Her face pale, disbelief mingling with anger and sadness. And for the first time I realized something crucial. I was no longer living for them. I was living for me. The freedom, the dignity, the choice, that was mine. And no one could take it away. Tanisha's voice trembled as she spoke, trying to reach some part of me that might still respond with the old motherly obedience, the forgiving heart that had endured so much. "Mama, I came to apologize. I want to make things right. I want a second chance. Please." I watched her, really watched her, and in that moment I saw the years of neglect, of selfishness, all laid bare in her eyes. But I also saw the truth I had known for decades. She had never truly been there for me. Not once, not in the ways that mattered. I told her calmly, "You had 50 years to be the daughter I needed. 50 years to see me, to respect me, to love me as a person, not just as a provider. Those years are gone. I don't have more time to wait for you to be what I needed you to be. My time now belongs to me." She faltered, tears falling freely, real this time. Not the performative one she had used before. Malik had not come, of course. That didn't surprise me. I had long known the truth of his priorities. Money and convenience had always mattered more to them than me. She had rehearsed this moment, I could tell. I let her in, curious, but not because I had forgiven her. She looked around, noticed the empty spaces where furniture had once been, and gasped. "Where's the sofa?" she asked. I told her the truth. I had given it away because it was mine to give. Her face pale, disbelief mingling with anger and sadness. And for the first time I realized something crucial. I was no longer living for them. I was living for me. The freedom, the dignity, the choice, that was mine. And no one could take it away. Tanisha's voice trembled as she spoke, trying to reach some part of me that might still respond with the old motherly obedience, the forgiving heart that had endured so much. "Mama, I came to apologize. I want to make things right. I want a second chance. Please." I watched her, really watched her, and in that moment I saw the years of neglect, of selfishness, all laid bare in her eyes. But I also saw the truth I had known for decades. She had never truly been there for me. Not once, not in the ways that mattered. I told her calmly, "You had 50 years to be the daughter I needed. 50 years to see me, to respect me, to love me as a person, not just as a provider. Those years are gone. I don't have more time to wait for you to be what I needed you to be. My time now belongs to me." She faltered, tears falling freely, real this time. Not the performative one she had used before. Malik had not come, of course. That didn't surprise me. I had long known the truth of his priorities. Money and convenience had always mattered more to them than me. Tanisha's desperation was a mask of realization. They had finally understood the depth of what they had lost. But understanding didn't undo the years of absence, the years of using me only when convenient. I handed them the envelopes I had prepared, the last pieces of my life they would receive. One for Tanisha, one for Malik. Inside, letters. Letters that laid bare everything I had endured, everything I had sacrificed silently, every lonely day I had swallowed so they could have more, every struggle they had ignored, every dollar, every night spent working when sick, every dream deferred. It was all there. And for the first time the truth was undeniable. Tanisha's hand shook as she opened the envelope. She pulled out the letter, unfolding it slowly, as if the paper itself held the weight of decades. Her eyes scanned the words I had poured my soul into. I watched her face shift. First confusion, then shock. Then the dawning realization of all she had ignored, all she had taken for granted. "Malik, you need to read this," she whispered, voice quivering. He took his envelope reluctantly, his hands stiff, his expression guarded. He read my words, and for the first time I saw the confusion and discomfort of someone who had never truly known the person they were supposed to call mother. I spoke calmly, my voice steady, carrying the weight of decades of endurance. "This is everything you should have known years ago. Every sacrifice, every moment I put you before myself, every time I gave you what I didn't have so you could have more. All of it. And the money from the house sale, the $100,000, you will never see while I am alive. It is mine. I decide how to use it. You have no claim to it. Not now, not ever." Malik's face hardened, disbelief etched into every line. "This can't be legal," he said. "There must be some law. Children are entitled." I stopped him with a glance that silenced years of excuses and arguments. "It is legal, Malik." Avery made sure. "I have every right to decide my life, my money, my house, my happiness. And this is what I chose. You are my children, yes, but you are not my caretakers, not my reason to exist. You are free to regret it. I am free to live." Tanisha's tears fell unbidden. Her voice was desperate, pleading. "But Mama, you don't have to leave. Stay close to us. Let us be better. Let us care for you." I shook my head slowly, the finality of decades echoing in my chest. "No. I already bought the ticket. I already closed the house sale. Goodbye is here. There is no turning back. My life is mine now." Tanisha reached for me, but I stepped back, not out of anger but out of clarity. For the first time in my life, I was choosing distance not as punishment, but as protection. "Mama, please don't leave like this," she cried, her voice cracking. But leaving like this was the only way I could leave. If I stayed any longer, regrets would creep in, softening me again, pulling me back into the same cycle of giving, and giving until there was nothing left of me. I looked at them, two grown adults who still wore their childhood pain like armor. Two people who had become so accustomed to taking that they somehow believed my sacrifices were their birthright. "You both had years," I said quietly. "Years to show up, years to listen, years to love without wanting something in return. But you only came when you thought you were losing something." Malik's jaw tightened as he closed his envelope and shoved it into his jacket. His discomfort was turning into anger. He had always used anger to hide the truth, that he didn't know how to love me without conditions. "I can't believe this," he muttered. "After everything we've been through?" I held his gaze. "We? Or me?" The room fell silent. No one could answer that. I took a deep breath, letting the air settle inside me like a promise. "I'm not leaving to hurt you," I said softly. "I'm leaving because staying has been hurting me." Tanisha sobbed harder, the kind of sob that comes from finally facing the truth you spent your life avoiding. Malik looked away, eyes flashing with a mix of confusion and regret he was trying desperately to hide. But neither reached for me again. I turned toward the door, feeling the weight of the moment settle over us. The version of me who had lived for them, worked for them, cried for them, that version was ending right there. And as I stepped forward, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The beginning of my own life. The bus terminal smelled faintly of exhaust and coffee, but to me it smelled like freedom. I carried my small suitcase, the sum of a life distilled to essentials. Clothes, a few personal mementos, my diary, and the promise of a new beginning. Ellie walked beside me, her presence a quiet reassurance, a tether to someone who had seen me, truly seen me, when the world had not. I glanced back once. Tanisha and Malik were still standing there, frozen in the place where I had spent decades being invisible to them. Their faces held shock, disbelief, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of regret. But I didn't linger. I had spent too long waiting for their awakening, and now it was time to awaken myself. The bus rolled slowly forward. I felt the vibration under my feet, felt the engine hum as if it were singing a song just for me. A song of departure, of letting go, of reclaiming the life that had been mine all along. I pressed my hand against the window, watching the familiar streets blur into lines of memory, knowing I would never return. Every building, every sidewalk, every corner of that city had been a chapter of struggle, of endurance, of quiet sacrifice. And yet, with each mile, a sense of relief deepened inside me. The weight of 50 years of giving, forgiving, and hoping for acknowledgement was lifting. For the first time in decades, I felt a pulse of possibility, a heartbeat that belonged solely to me. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt alive. Ellie squeezed my hand before stepping back. "Remember," she whispered, "this is just the beginning. You've earned this." And she was right. This was not an ending. This was the first page of a story I had been too afraid to write, too constrained by duty to live. Now every breath, every glance at the passing scenery was mine. The ride stretched into hours, but it didn't feel long at all. My mind drifted through years I had tried so hard to forget. The lonely nights after double shifts, the birthdays spent alone, the times I fell sick and waited for a knock on the door that never came. Each memory rose like a wave, but instead of drowning me, it passed gently, almost respectfully, as if acknowledging that it no longer had power over the woman I was becoming. Outside the window, the world rolled by slowly, wide fields, distant houses, small towns I had never heard of. Each one felt like a reminder that life was bigger than the small, painful corner I had been trapped in for so long. I wasn't running away. I was finally stepping into the world. As evening approached, the sky turned soft and golden. The bus interior fell quiet. People slept or whispered or stared at their phones, but I stared at my hands. These hands had raised children, picked up overtime shifts, wiped tears, cooked meals, and held a family together alone. For decades, they had never rested. And now, for the first time, they lay still, open, relaxed, unburdened. I whispered to myself, "You made it. You really made it out." Hearing my own voice tremble brought tears to my eyes. Not tears of sorrow, tears of release. Tears of a woman finally stepping into her own name, her own worth, her own future. Somewhere along the ride, the fear that had clung to me for years dissolved. The fear of disappointing my children, the fear of being alone, the fear of choosing myself. Now all I felt was a quiet certainty. I had done the right thing. Maybe not for them, but for me. When the bus pulled into the next station, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple. A new night, a new chapter. And as I stepped off for a brief break, the cool air touched my face like a blessing. Arriving at Coastal Haven the next morning felt like waking up inside a dream I had long forgotten I was allowed to dream. The air was crisp, scented with salt and pine, carrying a freshness I had never known in the city. It filled my lungs and made me feel alive in ways I hadn't felt in decades. Every inhale seemed to cleanse the remnants of guilt, the weight of ungrateful children, the years I had sacrificed without reciprocity. The terminal was small, almost quaint, with sunlight spilling through large windows and warming the polished floor. Ellie was waiting, her smile steady and comforting. She waved, and in that wave I felt a lifetime of reassurance. Someone who truly saw me, who understood me, who had become my anchor in a storm I hadn't thought I'd ever survive. I carried my suitcase, small but sufficient, with the essentials of my new life. No heavy baggage from the past. No lingering attachments except for the lessons learned and the memories worth keeping. Walking alongside Ellie, the streets unfolded gently, houses painted in cheerful colors, small gardens brimming with life. People greeted each other, slower, warmer, human in a way that made my city life feel like a distant shadow. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine mornings spent watching the sunrise over the water, afternoons reading by the window, evenings listening to the waves, a life lived only for me. The excitement was tempered with quiet awe, a recognition that this second chance, this life I had carved out alone, was not just possible. It was mine. I could finally choose how to live. As we reached the hotel where I would stay for the first few weeks, Ellie squeezed my hand. "This is it, Vivian. This is the start you've been waiting for." I nodded, tears prickling the corners of my eyes. They weren't tears of loss. They were tears of a woman reclaiming herself. The weight had lifted, and I felt the gentle rise of hope, warm and steady, like the first light of dawn breaking through years of night. The hotel room overlooked the ocean, and when I opened the window, the breeze rushed in, carrying the endless rhythm of waves, the cries of distant seagulls, and the scent of salt that seemed to awaken every cell in my body. I stood there for a long time, simply breathing, letting the sound and smell seep into me, as if the ocean itself was telling me, "You belong here, Vivian. You are free." I unpacked slowly, deliberately, only the essentials: clothes, a few books, my diary, and some photographs of Marcus and my parents. Nothing else mattered. I left behind the letters, the old furniture, the kitchenware, the remnants of a life that had been more obligation than joy. Each item I had sent away, each box I had shipped was a symbolic release, a shedding of the weight I had carried for decades. With every small action I felt lighter, freer, more myself. That evening I walked along the boardwalk, my shoes brushing against the worn wood, and watched the sun dip toward the horizon. The colors exploded in golds, pinks, and purples, reflecting in the water like a painting. For the first time in years I allowed myself to feel wonder, to marvel not at what I had done for others, but at what life could be for me. I met Miss Gloria Jenkins, a woman in her 80s who sat on a bench nearby. She smiled warmly, her eyes kind and knowing. "First day?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. I nodded, unable to speak at first. She laughed lightly. "Ah, there's a peace that comes when you finally do what's right for yourself. Enjoy it. You've earned it." We spoke for hours about the town, the people, the rhythms of life here, and I realized for the first time that age was not a limitation. It was simply another chapter, a fresh page waiting to be written. That night, I returned to the hotel, exhausted but exhilarated. I sat by the window, watching the moonlight shimmer over the ocean. I felt a gratitude so deep it brought tears to my eyes. Gratitude for courage, for clarity, for the chance to finally live for myself. I was Vivian, not just someone's mother, not someone's widow, not someone's sacrifice. I was me, at last, fully, unmistakably, and wonderfully me. The days that followed were a rhythm of small discoveries and simple joys. I woke early each morning, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat on the deck watching the sun rise over the ocean. The water shimmered like molten gold, and for the first time I truly felt present, not burdened by the past, not weighed down by expectations. Each wave seemed to wash away a little more of the old pain. Each breeze whispered, "This is your time." I explored the town slowly, letting myself get lost in its winding streets, the small shops, the friendly greetings of neighbors. Everyone seemed to move at a different pace, calmer, unhurried, living in a way I had forgotten existed. I walked along the beach, picking up shells, letting the cold water lap at my feet, feeling alive in a way I hadn't in decades. Every step I took felt like a reclaiming of life, a quiet celebration of freedom. I joined Gloria's group, and there I met women who had, like me, left behind lives filled with pain, disappointment, and betrayal. Ms. Eva Carter, 68, Mr. Ronald Davis, 75, and others shared their stories. We laughed, we cried, we shared tea, knitting needles, and books. There was no judgment here, no expectation, only understanding. I realized that family wasn't only blood, it was those who saw you, truly saw you, and loved you for who you were, not what you provided. Evenings were peaceful. I cooked for myself, simple meals I enjoyed without compromise. I wrote in my diary, recording thoughts and dreams I had ignored for years. I allowed myself to think about the future, a future that belonged entirely to me. My children, my past, even Marcus existed as memories, but they no longer dictated my happiness. I was building a life that was mine, constructed from courage, self-respect, and the quiet joy of finally choosing myself. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of my new life became comforting, almost meditative. I woke with the sun, drank my coffee slowly while listening to the waves, and walked along the shore. The ocean seemed endless, a vast mirror reflecting not only the sky but the new life I was building, one free from the expectations and manipulations of my past. Each day felt like a page turning, a story I was finally writing for myself. I explored more of Coastal Haven, discovering small bakeries, little bookshops, and a cafe where the owner, a gentle woman named Marisol, remembered my name and my order every morning. She asked nothing of me, expected nothing, and that, oddly enough, felt like a luxury. For the first time, I could exist simply as Vivian, without the weight of being mama or widow or provider. I could just breathe, just be. Gloria's reading group became a sanctuary. We shared stories of heartbreak, triumph, loss, and renewal. Their voices, warm, honest, tender, reminded me that it was never too late to begin again. One afternoon, as the sun poured gold across the sand, Gloria said, "You know, Vivian, starting over takes bravery most people never find." I smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I think I finally understand what it means to be brave," I replied. Evenings were quiet, reflective. I journaled for hours, letting thoughts flow freely, thoughts I had suppressed for decades. I wrote about Marcus, about my parents, about the years I had given to children who never truly needed me. And in writing I found peace. I realized that self-love wasn't selfishness, it was survival. Choosing myself wasn't cruelty, it was honesty. And with every word, with every breath, I reclaimed the life I deserved, piece by piece, wave by wave. One morning, a letter arrived for me at the hotel. I almost didn't open it, afraid of reopening old wounds, but curiosity won. It was from Ellie. She had written with her usual warmth, her handwriting looping gracefully across the page. She told me how proud she was, how relieved she felt to see me taking charge of my life, finally honoring myself. Her words made me ache with gratitude. She reminded me that family isn't always defined by blood, but by care, by love, by seeing someone truly. I spent that day walking along the pier, the salty breeze ruffling my hair, the sun warming my skin. I watched the waves roll in one after another, relentless, steady, just like time itself. And I thought about my children, Tanisha and Malik. Would they understand one day? Would they realize that I had given them 50 years of patience and love, only to be met with greed and indifference? Perhaps. Or perhaps they never would. I stopped caring. Their silence was confirmation enough. My peace, my dignity, my freedom were worth more than any inheritance they could ever receive. That evening, I unpacked the few boxes I had brought from my old life. Photographs of Marcus, my parents, and memories that truly mattered stayed. Everything else, the furniture, the objects, the reminders of a life that demanded too much, were gone. The emptiness in the rooms of my new home wasn't loneliness. It was space. Space to breathe, space to dream, space to finally be. I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate while watching the sun dip into the ocean. The colors exploded across the horizon. Fiery oranges, deep purples, tender pinks, and I thought, this is beauty. This is life. And it is mine. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into the rhythm of Coastal Haven. The mornings were always my favorite, the quiet before the town fully woke, the sun casting golden light across the waves, the air tinged with salt and freedom. I started keeping a journal, not just of events but of feelings, reflections, small victories, and the tiny beautiful moments I had ignored for decades. I wrote about the warmth of the sun on my skin, the sound of laughter from the local cafe, the gentle nods of neighbors passing by. Gloria invited me to join her book club, a gathering of women who, like me, had found themselves late in life. There was Ms. Eva with her soft voice and eyes that had seen too much, Mr. Ronald, who was a widower but radiated kindness, and others whose stories intertwined with ours, stories of loss, courage, and reinvention. Every meeting was a revelation. I realized that I wasn't alone in wanting to reclaim the years that had been spent sacrificing for others. That connection, that empathy, it filled a hole I hadn't even realized was there. I began to understand something profound. Happiness isn't a reward for endurance. It's a choice, a decision to honor yourself, even when the world expects you to serve others endlessly. I felt alive in a way I hadn't for decades, the burdens of guilt and obligation lifted, replaced by possibility and hope. I walked the beach, collected seashells, watched the gulls dive gracefully into the water, and for the first time I felt truly seen, truly free. One afternoon, while I was sitting on my deck with a cup of tea, I noticed a small boat bobbing gently near the shore. The sight made me laugh quietly to myself, a soft, unguarded laugh that had not been heard in years. I realized I had stopped holding my breath, stopped bracing for disappointment, stopped waiting for someone else to validate my existence. I was finally living for me. Ellie called that evening, as she often did. Her voice was warm and familiar, a tether to the city I had left behind but no longer longed for. She asked about the house, about the ocean, about how I felt each morning when the sun rose over the waves. I told her everything about the people I met, the laughter that filled my days, the quiet moments where I simply existed without expectation. She was overjoyed. For the first time in years, I felt like my life was fully mine, and I shared it with someone who celebrated me for who I was, not for what I could give. That night, I opened my diary and wrote, "I am Vivian Sterling, 71 years old, and for the first time I have no chains. I am free to live, to love myself, to chase dreams I put aside long ago. I am no longer defined by others' needs. I am whole. I am enough." The pen felt heavy in my hand, not with burden, but with the weight of truth finally claimed. And as I closed the diary, I looked out at the horizon and whispered to myself, "This is my life, and I will not let anyone diminish it again." The next morning, I woke with the sunlight spilling across my room, golden and warm. I made coffee and sat on the deck, inhaling the scent of salt and sea, feeling the breeze brush my face. For a moment, I closed my eyes and just breathed. I had dreamed of this peace for decades, and now it was real, tangible, soft, alive. It was mine. I decided to explore further along the coastline. I walked on the beach, my feet sinking into the wet sand, feeling the waves lap against my ankles. Each step forward felt like shedding another layer of the old life, the years of sacrifice, of unreciprocated love, of waiting for recognition that never came. The ocean seemed to echo my heartbeat, steady, rhythmic, unyielding. I realized then that life could still surprise me even at 71. It wasn't too late to find joy, to form new bonds, to be unapologetically myself. By afternoon, I had met another woman on the boardwalk, someone like me, someone who had left the past behind and sought peace. We spoke for hours, exchanging stories of loss, of family, of finally learning to love ourselves. Her laughter was contagious, her eyes bright with hope. I felt a warmth in my chest, a sense of belonging I had not felt in years. For the first time, I understood that family could be chosen, not just inherited. I went back to my new home that evening with a smile that lingered long after the sun dipped below the horizon. Weeks passed, and I settled into a rhythm I had never allowed myself before. Mornings were spent on the deck with coffee and a book, listening to the waves and watching the gulls circle above. Afternoons became walks along the shoreline, sometimes collecting shells, sometimes just letting the sand slip through my fingers. Evenings were quiet, the kind of quiet that hums with contentment rather than emptiness. I had learned to savor the simplicity, to find joy in the mundane. A sunrise, a cup of tea, a laugh shared with a new friend. Gloria and the group of women welcomed me into their world completely. There was Miss Eva, gentle and wise, with hands that had knotted yarn into hundreds of scarves, and Mr. Ronald, a widower who taught me that humor could heal even the deepest wounds. They shared their stories, their regrets, their victories, and in return I shared mine. Each story reminded me that I was not alone in seeking freedom from obligations that had suffocated us for decades. We became a chosen family, bound not by blood but by understanding, by empathy, by respect for each other's journeys. One afternoon, as I sipped tea on the deck, Ellie called. She asked about my first months, about my house, about the ocean. I could hear the smile in her voice. We talked until the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the sand, and for the first time I felt fully seen, fully heard. I realized that happiness didn't come from others loving me. It came from loving myself, protecting my peace, and nurturing the life I had fought to reclaim. I closed my eyes that night with a sense of completion, yet anticipation, because my story was just beginning. The days stretched into months, each one filled with a calm I had never known. I rose with the sun, feeling the cool breeze of the ocean on my skin, and allowed myself to breathe fully, as if I had been holding it in for 71 years. My small house became my sanctuary, every corner infused with choices I had made for myself, for my peace, for my joy. The furniture was simple, but it was mine. The curtains were white, letting light pour in like a promise of new beginnings. Every morning I would step onto the deck, coffee in hand, watching the waves rise and fall, realizing that life itself had a rhythm, relentless, soothing, eternal. I began writing more in my diary, chronicling every small victory, every moment of clarity, every laugh shared with Gloria, Ms. Eva, or Mr. Ronald. I wrote letters to the younger Vivian I once was, thanking her for enduring, for surviving, for holding on long enough to arrive here. The ocean became my confidant, my mirror, reflecting the freedom I had always yearned for. I no longer looked back at Tanisha or Malik with anger. I saw them as reminders of what I had escaped, the weight I no longer carried. My heart, once heavy with obligation and guilt, was now open to life, to friendship, to wonder. And on my 72nd birthday, sitting on the deck as the sun dipped low, I realized that I had found what so many chase endlessly: peace. A peace that comes not from being loved by everyone, but from choosing yourself when no one else will. I took a deep breath, the salty wind filling my lungs, and whispered to the ocean, to the world, to myself, I am Vivian. I am here. I am free. And for the first time it felt like enough.